God, get me to higher ground. It's so important in life that we seek higher ground when it comes to the way that we're living, the way we're responding to God. And so to call out to God and say, God, get me to higher ground is such a good plea and such a good prayer for our lives. When you look at culture, when you look at our sinful nature, you realize that is not the place to be living. The sinful thoughts and the ways that of the world are things that we need to rise above and live on higher ground. There's an interesting story of a pilot one day who said that as he was flying, he had a rat behind him, and he could hear the rat, and it was like gnawing at wires and things like that, and he thought, this is terrible. So he knew what to do. He took his plane up higher and higher and higher, where the air was getting thinner and thinner. He could still breathe, but eventually the rat would not be able to breathe. So he kept going higher until he no longer heard the gnawing. The rat had died. When he landed the plane, he said he looked back and he saw the dead rat there. In the same way, we got lots of thoughts that are like the rat. We got lots of ways of living that are like the rat. Our culture can be like the rat. We need to get to higher ground in the way that we live, in the motives that we hold, and in our lifestyle. So, for example, in Psalm chapter 61, verse 2, the psalmist says these words, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." Oh, that's something we should say all the time. God, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. I want to share with you today a few things that'll get you to that rock that is higher than you, than our low way of living, than our poor thought life, than the way that the culture often lives, to the higher ground. Here are 4 things to do to get to higher ground. So the first thing to do to reach the higher ground that God's calling you to, that ground that's above your sinful ways and above the sinful ways of culture, the way to get there is to determine that that's how you're going to live. To say, I am determined to be on that higher ground. I'm going to follow after the Lord. I'm going to live by His ways. This is my commitment, and this is the way I'm going to live out every day and every thought. It starts with the commitment. It starts with the determination to be on higher ground. There was a church one time that occasionally would get a bird stuck in their sanctuary, flying around. And maybe the bird would get in there on like a Friday or something like that, and they realized they had to get it out before Sunday. A bird flying around would be a pretty big distraction to a Sunday morning service. So this is what they did. They wouldn't shoot the bird or try to get it with a net or anything like that. They found an easier way, and it was this. At night, when everything was dark, they would simply take a big light and put the big light by an open door, by the exit. And so then the bird would go right for the light and go out to where there's freedom. In the very same way, God is calling us to determine to live according to the light that is Him and the light that is in His Word, and go straight for the light and live that way, always going straight for what He wants. Not going to the left, going to the right, smashing into a wall here, smashing into a window there. But instead saying, I'm going to follow the light and then find that freedom that God has for me on the higher ground. So in John chapter 8, Jesus says these words, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Living on the higher ground means we're going to say, He is the light of the world, and I am determined to live by His light and looking to it alone amidst all of the darkness and finding a higher ground when I follow the light. Secondly, then, having determined to live by the light, to going straight for that light every day, having determined that, then just know and realize what a wonderful decision you've made, and then live it out with passion, with everything you've got every day. No matter what you might have to give up or do differently, you're saying, yes, that's what I'm going to do. That you're going to be passionate about the decision to live according to the light. You're going to be passionate about getting to that higher ground. Someone once said this about sin, about how deceptive it really is. They said, imaginary sin is romantic and buried, but real evil is gloomy, monotonous, barren, and boring. And they continued, imaginary good is boring, but real good is always new, marvelous, and intoxicating. When you've chosen to live according to what God wants, you're living a life now that's new, that's marvelous, that's intoxicatingly wonderful. And what you've given up when you've chosen the higher ground is a life of gloom, of monotony, of barrenness, of boring, because that's what sin is. It's nothing but awfulness. It's not what the world says it is. It promises everything, does sin, and gives you nothing. You've never gained anything by sinning. No one's ever gained anything by sinning. It falsely promises the world. So live and realize that when you've made a decision to abandon sin and go to the higher ground, you've done a wonderful thing and you've made a great choice. Live it out with passion. Sacrifice whatever it would take to follow on into that higher ground. I had a friend one time I was with in the Philippines, and one time we went to order some food, and he thought he was ordering pork loin. Now, we had been traveling a lot, so pork loin would have been something perhaps very good after a long day of travel. But because of the language barrier, he didn't actually order pork loin. Without knowing it, he ordered pork lung. And so when his pork lung came, you can imagine his disappointment. It was literally a lung. And it wasn't in gravy or anything like that. I still remember it. It was a lung and it was bathed in blood. What a disappointment, going from pork loin to that. That's the way sin really is a lot in our lives. It promises something wonderful, and it delivers something terrible. And the opposite is true when we follow the ways of God. It always delivers what it promises. It always provides something wonderful and great for your life. It always delivers exactly what God says it will deliver, which is freedom and joy and peace and closeness with God. It always delivers higher ground away from everything you don't want. And so live out your decision to be on higher ground with great passion always. The scriptures say this in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 2. Ill-gotten gains do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. Always remember, sin never profits, but righteousness delivers from death. Oh, live out your commitment to follow God and to get to the higher ground with the greatest passion and the greatest sense of joy and conviction, because you've made a wonderful decision. So having made that decision to go to higher ground and having realized what a great decision it is so that you're living it out with passion, realize from this point, number 3, that there are a lot of patterns probably in your life that need to be broken in order for you to live on higher ground and to be pleasing to God. In fact, all of your life will be a series of breaking bad patterns and replacing them with new patterns. We all have a lot of bad patterns to break. And that's what we want to do. Say to God, God, I want to break these old patterns that are holding me back, old patterns that I once lived in. We're creatures of habit. We establish patterns, and then those patterns seek to die hard. But we want to make sure they do die. Patterns of sin, we need to say, ought to go. And every pattern we ought to replace it with. Patterns of righteousness ought to come into our life. Make that a regular routine, replacing the old patterns and welcoming the new patterns. Recognize how much we are creatures of habit and need patterns to be broken. There's a funny but true story about a few dolphins that were trained in Key Largo, Florida to perform. Maybe you've seen that. It's wonderful. They perform tricks and then the trainers reward them with food, so they're happy to perform these tricks. Well, one day these very well-trained dolphins escaped from where they were performing. And they went 55 miles away into open waters. And some boaters kept coming by, seeing these dolphins in the open water. And the strangest thing is that they reported that they kept doing the tricks at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 4 p.m. Because that's when they did the tricks every day. 10 a.m., 2 p.m., 4 p.m. They just kept the same pattern. Well, we're a lot like that. We keep the same patterns. So pull back and say to yourself, hey, what patterns am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? That I should be discarding? Where are they? And if you replace them with wonderful patterns, what a difference that's going to make. You're going to see yourself more and more getting to the higher ground that God's calling you to get to. So look at this passage in Ephesians chapter 4, where we read this. Put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in righteousness and holiness. Put off the old, put on the new. If you want to get to higher ground, you want to be more and more pleasing to God, break the old patterns. Break those old habits that you once had in your former manner of life. Put on the new self, be renewed in the spirit of your minds. Let that be a regular pattern of renewing yourself, breaking the old ways of living. Oh, that's the way to higher ground. You got lots of patterns. Ask God, help me break them all. Anything that's keeping you down, anything that's keeping you from the higher ground, God, break them all. Get to that higher ground by breaking those patterns. Fourthly then, and of great importance, realize that as you seek to live for God, as you seek that higher ground in the Lord, as you seek to break those patterns that you have in your life, God is going to be helping you all the way. God is going to be providing for you everything you need to break old patterns, everything you need to escape the sinful ways of your life, the sinful ways of culture, and to live on holy ground. As you make that decision, as you are passionate about it, and you're determined to break old patterns, God's going to be providing for you the strength, the power, the wisdom, the ability to do it all. We live by the strength that God provides. We succeed by the strength of His might. He is going to be giving you everything you will need to succeed. There's a wonderful story of a missionary one time named John Patton. And he said he had a terrifying night one night out in the mission field because he and his wife, their hut, were surrounded by a tribe that was going to attack and kill them. They stood in their hut praying all night. Well, night came and went. Morning arrived and they were still alive and they were so glad. Now, a couple of years later, some time passed, and 1 year later, the chief of that tribe that spared them became a Christian. So the missionary went to that chief and said, that night, when you'd surrounded our hut, why didn't you kill us? And he said, well, we couldn't kill you because there were tons of men outside your hut. And he said, each of them, hundreds of men, each of them in shining garments with drawn swords circling your hut. The missionary John Patton said that we had no men there. And the tribal leader said, you sure did. See, God arrives and provides the help that we're going to need to live for Him, to do His will. And that's what He's going to provide all the time for everything that God's calling us to do. Take a look at this verse in Psalm chapter 5. It reads, for it is you who blesses the righteous man, O Lord. You surround him with favor as with a shield. God is going to surround you with favor as with a shield. You are going to be walking in the favor of God as He surrounds you with all the help you need to live for Him. So realize as you get up each day and say, God, I want to get to that higher ground, God is going to surround you with favor to do that and give you everything you need so that that is absolutely something you can accomplish and something you will accomplish. Thank the Lord for surrounding us with favor as with a shield so that everything He wants to happen in our life actually will happen if we choose it. There's a beautiful song that's sung by a man named Steve Green about higher ground, and it goes like this. He says, build your house above the ocean. Build your house on higher ground. Build above the world's commotion and its mesmerizing sound. You're taking your life into your hands by building your castles in the sand. So build up high above the tide. Build on higher ground. In the world, but not of it, caught in the storm, we've got to rise above it. Waves of ungodliness eroding the shore. It's a treacherous sea, too wild to ignore. God is calling us to remain unstained in the rising flood of sin. And it's easier to keep it out if we don't invite it in. Friend, brother, sister, go to the higher ground. Live on higher ground. Be determined to get there, because that's God's call for your life, that we not fall into the world's commotion and its mesmerizing sound, but instead we rise above the tide and build on higher ground. I hope you've liked this time together today. I hope you like our midweek devotionals and every one of our questions that comes up new every Sunday. We're so glad you're part of the community. And if you have liked these videos and look forward to the next questions, click the like button and the subscribe button. And let's build a wonderful community together and be in God's Word, being on higher ground by listening to Him and all the things that He has for us to know. And remember, for every question, there's always an answer.